Hello, I'm Catherine Sines, the president of the Rotary Club of Hudson. Rotary is a professional organization of a group of men and women who support Rotary International. We also join together by a common interest of service to our Hudson community, and we have a sincere desire to give back. We meet weekly on Wednesdays at Laurel Lake Retirement Community, 200 Laurel Lake Drive, in their dining room. We meet from 7:30 to 8:30 and would like to invite you to join us. For more information about Rotary, go to www.rotaryhudson.org. Enjoy the following excerpts from one of our recent meetings and consider joining us on Wednesday morning.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests.
Good morning, Ron.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Phil Herman.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning, Will. Let us pray. Dear God, today we come to you with grateful hearts, grateful for our friends and colleagues, grateful for time to eat and visit together, grateful for an opportunity to learn and hear from other leaders, grateful for our health, and grateful for our community. As we begin a new school year, God, we ask your blessings on our students. Protect them as they travel to and from school, in their athletic contests and performances, and as they face the many cultural challenges that exist today. Help all of us as adults to be models of character that they may follow our lead and our example. Give us wisdom in guiding them throughout the year, and help us as Rotarians to grow as servant leaders in supporting our students and community. Amen. Amen.
Now please join me in the pledge and the four-way test. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will be beneficial to all concerned. And now to lead us in song, Dick Pearsall.
Let's start the day off optimistically. Let's sing When You're Smiling. That's a good start. When you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. When you're laughing, the sun comes shining through. But when you're crying, that brings on the rain, so set your sighing, be happy again. So when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. You did a good job.
Thank you, Dick. And now our president, Catherine Sines.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning, Catherine.
You got to smile after that. Come on, you just have to. First, I'd like to call Chris Barker to come up and introduce any of our visitors.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests.
Good morning, Chris.
Well, we have 3 visitors with us, and I believe they're all on their way to becoming official members. So if they could please stand up when I call their name. We have Dr. Bob Graves.
Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. And John Hopkins. And we also have Bill Thessling. So thanks for joining us.
We have a couple announcements this morning. First, Gail Royster would like to come up and talk for just a second.
You're welcome. Thank you, President Catherine, and good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. Are you all still speaking to me? Okay. Who else showed up at the picnic besides Todd Tobin? Who's there? Oh, get out. You did? Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, here's what happened, guys. Friday, 80% chance of thunderstorms, okay, all day long. No, it's the truth. Tom had to buy the food. So I called Catherine and we said, you know, if it was 40, 50%, we might take a chance. 80%, oh, we can't, spend $500 on food and, what are we going to do with it? So that's what happened. I did send an email. Sorry if I missed some of you, or some of you just didn't open your email. Anyway. Would you like to reschedule in September, or shall we just, oh, come on, mumble, tell me. Raise your hand if you would like to reschedule. Oh, there's just 2 Tobins in it. Yeah, okay. I think maybe we'll pass till next year, thank you.
It was a tough decision for an all-day Saturday. When I was at the park with my kids, I kept thinking, it's beautiful. We should have had the picnic. But hindsight. Bob Cram, would you like to come up and talk? I think I know what he wants to talk about. This weekend is Art on the Green.
What's the forecast?
It's rain or shine.
Good morning. The forecast is sunny, 0% chance of rain, Saturday and Sunday. So we're in good shape. It is this weekend. It's this coming Saturday and Sunday. So if you've forgotten your time, I have the sheet. I hope everybody got it. I emailed the sign-up sheet to everybody as an attachment. Some people aren't real good at computers and don't know how to download an attachment. But if you missed that, see me after today's meeting. I have one opening, and that is Sunday at 10:30. If somebody didn't sign up and would like to, see me after also. And if you don't know where we're meeting, does everybody know that? If some of the new people might not, it's see me after the meeting so I can draw you a map as to where we are. It's the same as last year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before. So just come to the same place. And I've talked to the Friday setup people. We're all set for 12 o'clock to get everything set up. All right, thank you, and thanks for volunteering.
And we still need someone else to volunteer for that because I can't. It's my birthday and I'm going to the Indians game. But I am going to be there Saturday, so can't be there Sunday. Next we have on is our speaker, and I'd like Jim Ahern to come up and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. Gail, don't feel bad. You're not any better than Rich Warfield in guessing whether the weather's going to be good or bad. We were supposed to play golf yesterday, and it was 80% chance of rain. What happened, Rich?
I blew it.
No rain. Today is the 4th of, we have 5 Wednesdays in August and covering 5 areas of energy in Ohio. And Doug Colafella is here from First Energy, and he brought out in front, and when you leave, you get a chance to see it, it's the first nuclear-powered car. Wake up, there's no such thing as a nuclear-powered car. Sub maybe, but no. No, it's a Leaf, and he may get a chance to talk a little bit about all electric.
Drive around the parking lot.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Doug is a consultant for external communications at First Energy. His work is focused on managing communication programs that support the company's state, federal energy policy initiatives. He plays a key role in the company's public stance on complex energy legislation, as well as building and mobilizing broad coalitions that support safe, clean, and affordable energy. He joined the company in 2011 as a result of a merger of First Energy and Allegheny Energy when he was manager of external communications. At Allegheny, he handled the company's public relations activities in Pennsylvania, as well as a successful effort to build one of the largest interstate transmission line projects in the United States. His background includes nearly a decade of serving clients at 2 of the world's largest public relations firms, Ketchum and Burson Marsteller.
He also handled marketing and communications for Strategic Energy, a competitive retail electric supplier based in Pittsburgh. Doug is a graduate of Penn State, degree in political science, native of Pittsburgh, but he's lived in Hudson for 5 years?
6 years.
6 years, and has 3 sons. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Doug Colafella.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Appreciate the warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here today. Certainly excited to speak at the Rotary Club, not only as a representative of First Energy, but as a proud Hudson resident. Like I said, I've been here for about 6 years, and just feels like home. It's like I never lived in Pittsburgh at this point. But so it's good. Oh, don't worry. I'm still not a Browns fan yet, but we'll work on that. It may take a few successful seasons. I don't know. It may never happen, but we'll see. So anyway, I appreciate, I think this is great that you guys are doing this whole energy feature. I mean, I can't get my wife to listen to energy issues at the dinner table for more than 10 minutes, and you guys have been doing this for weeks now. So I think that's great. I think the average citizen, doesn't really think about energy all that much. They generally think when it comes to energy, the average citizen generally cares about 2 things. One, that the electricity stays on, and that, that their monthly bill is reasonable. But, I think behind that basic premise is, as you're finding out, it's a very dynamic, very complex industry, and, one that's, really important to our economy and our way of life, both here in Hudson and beyond. So, I find it fascinating, and so I'm glad you're all willing to listen. If you've attended the other August meetings, I understand that you've heard about lots of different forms of energy. You've talked about solar, you've talked about wind, I understand. I think you may have had somebody from the gas industry here as well. What I'm here today to tell you first is that all those sources of energy that you've heard about, we need all of them. There's no question about it. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, just like investing. You'd never put all your eggs in one basket as an investor. So I want to say that we need all these different forms of energy. They're all going to be important. Renewables, gas, coal, nuclear, anything else that may come down the road, and battery technology. But I want to then focus on nuclear. It's a tremendously valuable, clean source of energy, and one that's frankly facing some significant challenges right now, and we're going to talk about that. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about, let me introduce First Energy. It's interesting, every other community in Northeast Ohio I talk to, we're generally looking at a bunch of First Energy customers. If you live in Hudson, as you know, we have a municipal utility, but we do serve some parts of Hudson through our Ohio Edison utility. But, obviously the Hudson municipal system is fed by the First Energy transmission system. If you've ever seen the big substation there on Stowe Road as you're getting ready to cross the turnpike over to Hudson Springs Park, that's our biggest feed into the Hudson municipal system. But just quickly about First Energy, obviously we're headquartered in Akron, Ohio. While the First Energy name only goes back to 1997, our history goes back over 100 years, as Ohio Edison. And, we're now in 6 states, all the way from the Ohio-Indiana border over to the Jersey Shore. And we're in 6 states with 10 utilities, 10 different branded utilities that serve about 6 million customers. But, our home is Ohio, and I think it always will be. I think, that's, we're very active in the community. We're very proud of our legacy in building Northeast Ohio over the years, and, our employees live and work here. So we truly want what's best for the state, including clean, reliable, and affordable energy. So, I think we spend a lot of time at First Energy talking about the future of energy in Ohio, and the reality is that we should. This is kind of interesting, some interesting facts here. Ohio is a very energy-intensive state. I think if you look at Ohio, we're only behind California and Texas for energy consumption among industrial and in the industrial sector. It's pretty significant. You're talking about 2 huge states, and if you look at the size of Ohio compared to Texas and California, we use way more energy than than those other states do when you consider the size of a state like Ohio. You know, it's not just energy intensive. From an industrial standpoint, I think we're ranked 8th in commercial energy usage. Residential, we're the 7th biggest consumer of electricity. So we're not Vermont. You know, we can't throw up a few windmills and say, you know, hey, we're good to go here. You know, we've got steel plants. We have large manufacturers in steel and large commercial and you know, large cities here. So we need to have, you know, an energy intensive state needs a strong energy policy. And, you know, it's interesting. I don't know if you know that the PUCO, under the current rules, has no jurisdiction over the siting of the power plants in this state. They have no jurisdiction over what types of power plants we have. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that later. And again, when you consider the energy intensive needs of Ohio, that diversity of supply that I talked about is what is just so important. So in that theme, if you look at First Energy, you know, we have a pretty diverse source of generation. We've got you know, about 55% of our electricity comes from coal-fired plants, almost 25% from nuclear, and then we've got about 9% of natural gas-fired plants and a smaller but growing amount of renewable energy. We're one of the largest providers of wind energy in the region, and we have enough wind. We're not a developer, but we buy wind energy from developers that, you know, we take ownership of about 300 megawatts of wind energy, which is it's enough to power 300,000 homes in Ohio. So that's a pretty significant amount. We have made big strides from an environmental standpoint. We have actually closed about 11 coal-fired plants since 2012, which has, you know, reduced our CO2 emissions pretty significantly. Our plants all comply with current environmental regulations, and of interest, you know, about 100% of our energy comes from either low or non-emitting energy sources. So we've made great strides from an environmental standpoint while having a very balanced mix of supply. And I think that tracks pretty well with electricity generation, the fuel mix across the United States. If you look at this chart, I think it's kind of an interesting chart. If it starts back at 1990, you'll notice that natural gas has grown tremendously because we're now sitting under the Saudi Arabia of gas. We have so much gas now that you're starting to see new gas plants being built. I think your speaker probably told you we've got 3 or 4 gas plants under construction, not First Energy, but the industry has about 3 or 4 big plants that are under construction right now in Ohio. So we're going to see more gas. We're starting to see more renewables. You know, that says they're projected to have about 23% renewables through, what am I seeing, 2020, 2040. Right now we're at about 13%. That's really about 1% solar and about 3% wind. But it's growing. Coal is falling. Coal isn't as sexy as it used to be. It's kind of, it's not just suffering from an image problem. I think the challenge with coal is that it just can't be price competitive with natural gas. That's really the biggest problem. A lot of people like to think that Obama just was killing, that he killed coal. It was frankly natural gas more than anything else that has caused a number of coal plants to close. And then nuclear is held pretty steady at about it's about 20% of our national energy mix right now, but hanging on for some reasons I'm going to talk about. Before I get into nuclear, I just wanted to go through just real quick. I think it's important. I don't want to stand up here and just talk about strictly nuclear as is the only thing that we need. I want to talk about nuclear in the context of all of our various fuel sources. And the point being here is that, again, we need all these different sources because, frankly, all these sources have pros and cons to them. You can't, and I think it's, good planners with sound engineering principles have always relied on a varied mix of fuels because, from a price standpoint, if one fuel source becomes more expensive or the price goes up, you can generate electricity with other sources. If there are, difficulty getting the supply, you can turn to other sources. Coal we talked a little bit about. It's abundant, it's low cost. But there are environmental concerns with coal, high transportation costs. Nuclear produces in Ohio nearly all of the clean energy, carbon-free energy in Ohio comes from nuclear. But it's difficult to build a nuclear plant. They take a long time, and there's a lot of regulation, and obviously we're still trying to figure out some kind of a waste disposal solution, some kind of a central solution. We don't have one today. They tried to do the Yucca Mountain storage facility out in Nevada, and after spending billions of dollars, that thing has been kind of cast to the side. Natural gas, like the point there is natural gas. Yeah, we have a ton of it. We're starting to see a lot of natural gas plants being built because they're easy to build. You can build a big plant and have 14 employees and be able to run that plant around the clock. That's significant. That's hard to compete with. But the problem with gas is it's very volatile. The price can be very volatile, and we've seen it before. We've seen big gas build-outs, and then, they've realized that as that price shoots up, electricity prices can go up really quickly. Hydro is less of an issue around here. It's not, it's less feasible in this part of the country, but we do have some hydro. There's some land use and environmental concerns with hydro, but, it's essentially free and renewable. And wind and solar is interesting. I'm going to show you something on the next slide. Wind and solar is growing like crazy because it's largely subsidized. It's the construction is subsidized. A lot of tax credits available. One of the tricky things about wind is that if you look at the blue bar, that's electric demand, and at the bottom is the hours of the day. Electric demand, if you look at the blue, in the middle of the night, electric demand is pretty low. As electric demand rises throughout the day, wind speed decreases. The wind blows at night, but you don't really need it at night as much. It runs at night, but as the electric demand increases, the average wind speed decreases. So there are some challenges there. So we need to be able to complement renewables with what we call baseload 24/7 reliable energy sources that can run all the time. And that brings me to nuclear. And by the way, at any time, if anyone has any questions, I don't mind taking questions along the way, and we'll certainly do questions at the end. Which takes me to nuclear. In nuclear, if you look at as a generating source, it offers unmatched reliability. If you look at what is called capacity factor, which is essentially in a given year, what's the total amount of time that source can run, and how much does it actually run? How much is it able to run? A nuclear plant can run flat out about 92% of the year. And typically the only reason it's down for that 8% is, for routine maintenance and, outages for maintenance. So it runs around the clock, 24/7, very low cost once it's up and operating. Natural gas and coal are about the same, but again, wind and solar is primarily just due to intermittency, due to, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. So, nuclear is extremely reliable, and it's also extremely important to the state also for economic reasons as well, and from an environmental standpoint. We have two large plants in Ohio. You may have seen both of them. There's the Davis-Besse plant. If you've ever been to the Lake Erie Islands or up at Port Clinton, you could see the cooling tower over there in Oak Harbor, Ohio. It's about I think it's a 900 megawatt unit, which means that generates enough power that's enough energy to power about 1 million homes. So very good, one of the top performers in the industry from a safety standpoint, employs about 700 people. And then the Perry plant, which went in operation in 1986. And if you've ever been to Fairport Harbor, you could see Perry there as well. Some people always wonder, what is that coming out of the cooling towers? That's just water vapor, folks. What is that? So anyway, Davis-Besse and Perry are, and you also see cooling towers on coal-fired plants. I think a lot of people see cooling towers and assume it's a nuclear plant. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a nuclear plant if it has the big, cone-shaped cooling tower. But from an environmental standpoint, Davis-Besse and Perry produce 90% of Ohio's carbon-free electricity. Doesn't involve the burning of fossil fuels, creates no ash or combustion residues, so no emissions of greenhouse gases or water pollution, and our operators are continuously monitoring the environmental status of the air, the water, the vegetation, of about a 25-mile radius at all times. Economic benefits cannot be overlooked of a nuclear plant. These are they're high-paying jobs. You got 700 people work at Davis-Besse, about 720 at Perry. I think the payroll is significant. They pay about $25 million in taxes. If you're familiar with the Perry School District and the Oak Harbor School District, actually it's the Benton Harbor Salem School District, that high school was built by Davis-Besse. Practically with Davis-Besse money. They offer baccalaureate programs. It's a tremendous school district. And largely it's the tax revenues, about $25 million in local and state taxes that were paid by those nuclear plants just last year. So and every dollar spent to operate a typical nuclear plant creates an additional $1.04 in a local community through employee spending and vendor purchases and property ownership, and so. Nuclear plants, about $510 million contributed to Ohio's gross domestic product. So they are a significant economic driver in the state, and resources that we'd like to see continuing running. Both of those plants are licensed through, I think Perry's through 2026, and Davis-Besse, we recently received a license extension for Davis-Besse through 2037. From an environmental, one other point from an environmental standpoint, I thought this was sort of interesting. A 1 pound of nuclear fuel the size of a golf ball has the energy equivalent of 15 train cars of coal. That's a pretty incredible heat source. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. So we talked a little bit about our plants. We also own Beaver Valley, which is in western Pennsylvania, and we're all part of a regional market now, so some of the electricity that may be keeping the lights on here today could have came from Beaver Valley. So I don't know how familiar, I think my colleague Jennifer Young may have spoke here last year, and she talked a little bit about nuclear, but I doubt you have all this committed to memory, and you may not have been here. So I just want to talk quickly about, how does a nuclear plant work? I think a lot of people in the general public generally seem to think that nuclear plants generate electricity differently than other forms of, than traditional, as if like nuclear fission somehow creates electricity. The nuclear fission is essentially serves as the heat source. Nuclear plants generate electricity, frankly, the same way that Thomas Edison designed his plants on the same principles, over 100 years ago. When he used to, when they would burn coal to generate heat, which creates steam, and steam is sent through, tubes to spin a turbine, which generates electricity. The key difference with nuclear energy is the heat source is fission. We don't burn coal, we don't burn natural gas or oil. We split uranium atoms in a reactor in a process called fission, where essentially inside the reactor, we have enriched uranium that are basically placed in these 14-foot long tubes, these fuel assemblies, and they're precisely arranged in a way that we create an atomic reaction that creates insane amount of heat. And that basically does is that nuclear process heats water, boils water, which produces steam. It's sent through the steam line into a turbine generator, and the turbine blades spin and fires a generator, which produces electricity. So it's essentially, it's the same way that you would generate electricity from gas, from coal, from a fossil source, but it's being done through a nuclear process. And I think I've already explained this here. Boil water to produce steam, spins a propeller-type blades on the turbine, and a turbine turns a generator shaft where you essentially have coils of water that create those magnetic fields that produce electricity. The standard, engineering fundamental that was established a long time ago. So that's how a nuclear plant operates. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about our safety procedures. If you have any other questions about what we do from a disposal standpoint, from a safety standpoint. If you've ever met any of our engineers at our nuclear plants, these are the most intense individuals you'll ever want to meet. They're the people that you want running a nuclear plant. Not always the most flamboyant, individuals are the people you want to like sidle up to at a party and hang out with all night, because these are almost military, almost a military type mentality where they take everything extremely seriously. Everything is, when they talk to each other, they repeat back to each, they give instructions to each other, and they repeat back what I heard, the instruction, that I repeat that instruction back to the person who told you, in these protocols that are done. It's just tremendous, but these are extremely bright, hardworking, dedicated individuals in these plants. So we're very proud of our nuclear plants. We're proud of the energy that they deliver around the clock. But this is where it really gets interesting. We're in a situation where you're seeing not only just nuclear plants challenged in Ohio, we're seeing nuclear plants across the country that are closing prematurely. And the reason why, I previously said that, the PUCO in the state of Ohio, through legislation, a decade or more ago, you may have heard about deregulation, where the production of electricity was going to become a competitive business. We have created, it's called a competitive market, but it's not really a competitive market. It's price-based, but there's a lot of rules in place, and those rules are federally directed through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Ohio essentially relinquished control of its energy supply future through deregulation when we created kind of regional markets for electricity. And what's basically going on is that market on a daily basis, that market every day looks at what is the cheapest source of electricity available to serve customers today. And that's the electricity that we're going to dispatch to serve customers. We are dealing with depressed prices that have been a sustained period of depressed energy prices, largely driven by low-cost natural gas. So while we're starting to see more natural gas plants come online, it's essentially harming nuclear plants, coal-fired plants, and these 24/7 baseload plants. It's really not providing the revenue that they need to maintain, to be able to maintain operations, to be able to continue operating. So in other words, the energy markets are not the market simply looks at what's the lowest cost source. It doesn't look at the reliability and environmental attributes of a plant. Before deregulation, utilities looked from a long-term standpoint. We need diversity. We're going to have several different types of plants, so we don't put all of our eggs in one basket. And we're going to look at, how can this plant, is it in the right place? Is it near cities? Can it serve customers? Is it going to be reliable? Is it going to be environmentally sustainable? From an economic development standpoint, where do we want to put plants that'll help create jobs and that sort of thing? We don't look at things from that perspective anymore. So you're starting to see nuclear plants closing across the U.S. If you look at the list of plants here, you'll see they're in a number of different states. And the reason for closure are low prices, low energy and capacity prices. And I'm all for the free market. I'm sure many will sit here and say, well, hey, if you can't produce electricity as cheaply as natural gas, well, then I guess these plants have to close. We're not dealing with tennis shoes or, window cleaner here. We're talking about sources of electricity that keep the lights on, that sustain our quality of life, that are needed to support Ohio's energy-intensive economy. We believe it's important. We believe that energy is a little bit different, where we can't put all of our eggs in one basket, where we start losing these nuclear plants, and we wind up in just a few short years with nothing but gas plants and subsidized renewables. Because as natural gas prices increase or potentially spike, we're going to see much higher prices. So to have more of a balanced mix that includes renewables, we believe is really a better long-term solution. So we believe that the state of Ohio needs to take more control over its energy future, and there are ways that we can do that. The state of Illinois and New York recently passed legislation called zero emissions nuclear legislation that is essentially recognized. It's a program that's going to recognize those economic and environmental attributes of nuclear plants and reliability as well. That would compensate those plants for that unique value. We are looking at legislation like that in Ohio today. There's actually legislation in front of the Ohio General Assembly right now, what we're calling the ZEN program. It's zero emissions nuclear. I believe Larry Obhoff is speaking next week. This is something I know he's very familiar with, something that all the utilities in the state support. And there's no timetable for it right now. The legislation is out there. But we believe as part of comprehensive energy legislation in Ohio, we'd like to see that legislation move forward. Customers would still continue to have the ability to shop for a supplier. The market would basically stay the same, but it would provide a revenue stream that we believe would be adequate to ensure that Davis, Bessie, and Perry can continue operating at least until market conditions improve, so we don't wind up in a situation where we don't have diversity anymore. We lose a lot of jobs. We don't have the reliability situation that we think we're going to face. Looking at the same in Pennsylvania, the other large utility, Exelon in Pennsylvania, which owns PECO, the utility in Philadelphia, and also ComEd in Chicago. We are partnering with Exelon and the Nuclear Energy Institute in Pennsylvania. The legislature recently created a nuclear caucus to look at these issues. So we don't have legislation on the table in Pennsylvania yet, but we think that it's coming, and we're working hard to see that, to make sure we can keep nuclear in the energy mix. And in fact, there's a lot of folks. We've got a large coalition in place right now that's been lobbying the Ohio legislature. I left brochures on everybody's tables. I believe there are some brochures on the table for our Clean Energy Ohio coalition. If you believe in maintaining reliable electricity and economic development in the state, I would encourage anyone. Again, you don't have to, but I would encourage anyone to take a look at that brochure, and you can visit that website and have the ability to submit letters to legislators weighing in with support to make sure that the state considers these resources. Like I mentioned, the ZEN legislation is out there. It mirrors actions that New York and Illinois have taken, and the federal government has looked at that from a legal standpoint. Recently, courts upheld that legislation. I should say upheld that legislation in New York and Illinois, that it's constitutionally feasible to protect nuclear power generation within a state within a regional market. And we have both companion bills in the House and Senate right now. And if that legislation was passed, then the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio would administer that program through what we expect would be a surcharge of maybe $3 to $5 on customers' bills over a period. I think that is still being debated in the legislature. So that's my story. Again, all the other utilities, AEP and Duke, have also supported this legislation, and we'd like to see it move forward. We think it would be feasible for the state. So if anyone has any questions about ZEN or nuclear in general, or just energy issues overall.
Is it possible that any of those plants that are closed could be brought back online?
That's a good question, and the question is almost entirely no, because once you decommission a nuclear plant, it's not coming back. It's not coming back. I mean, that kind of an operation needs to be sustained around the clock. It was the same with a lot of our coal-fired plants. We closed 11 plants. None of them have come back. And there's been some interesting examples that the Nuclear Energy Institute has done. They've done some case studies on communities where there were a large nuclear plant and those plants closed. And the economic, and again, you see, it's not like this doesn't happen, but the economic collapse in some of those communities was pretty substantial.
Yes, sir.
I think,
Oh,
yeah, I think I'm going to pass
oh, you have the,
the mic.
okay.
Yeah.
Bring over the microphone. Oh, there's two microphones. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I have two questions, one of which is, what is the efficiency of production of nuclear energy with respect to the entire fuel cycle? Because that's how we normally calculate the efficiency of production of energy. So that's my first question, then I have a follow-up.
Okay. You know, I think you may be referring to what they go as heat rates, or the.
I'm talking about if you deal with the whole fuel cycle, from the mining of the fuel source to its refinement, production, disposal of waste, and the amount of energy required to boil the water, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about boiling water to create steam.
Yeah. I suspect I won't be able to answer. And by the way, I want to thank you. You were the most engaged listener I had today. I think you. I appreciate. I could tell you were listening to, hanging on every word of my presentation. I appreciate that. And I think I have a feeling he may be able to answer this question better than I can. But
thank you. Yeah, the answer to your question is approximately 0.5% for the uranium fuel cycle, because very little of the uranium is actually used as fuel.
I understand that, but there's a lot of waste.
There's a lot of waste, but you know, there's the whole talk of can you reprocess the fuel and things like that, which goes. As long as I got the microphone, I'll ask my question. Can you comment on the rise of costs of nuclear power plants historically? For example, even correcting for inflation from the early 70s to like the late 80s, there's been at least a quadrupling in the cost of a power plant per unit capacity. Can you comment on where that came from?
Are you referring to new construction?
Yeah, new construction of a new power plant. You know, in the early days, it's going to be too cheap to meter, and then later on, it's anything but. And that's reflected in the power plant costs. The fuel costs are relatively minor,
right,
in such a plant. But from the early 70s to the late 80s, it was quadrupling or higher.
Yes, and you know, I think it's similar with coal plants, where it's not necessarily the costs increasing, their overall fixed costs increasing. To me, it's more of a comparative thing when you look at the other sources of energy that are out there. You know, like for example, a coal plant, it's, you know, they're generally able to produce electricity at the same cost they always had, and they were always able to make a lot of money. The challenge is now they're competing against natural gas, where their costs are just so low. You know, you can now build a natural gas plant, and you get that plant up and running fairly quickly. The fuel cost is now comparable. You know, the whole idea of cheap to meter was before we had $2 an MCF gas. And you can run a gas-fired plant with 10, 15, 25 employees. One of the challenges that we've seen is with the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which runs a plant. You know, we have to, there's a certain number of employees and functions that you have to have at a nuclear plant. You know, we have, you know, there are a certain number of security agents, security officers that you have to have, various compliance officers. You know, the number of employees that we have there, 700 employees in Davis-Besse, are largely regulated. So, you know, safety obviously is our number one concern. We would never compromise safety at a plant. But even if we wanted to have fewer employees and felt like, you know, with technology we can do less, NRC's been a little slow to catch up. And if you've heard, you know, I did a tour of Perry a few years back, and I mean, I think we'd all feel comfortable sleeping at night knowing that it is essentially like an armed camp when you walk in there. I mean, it's, you know, there's watchtowers with machine guns and, you know, numerous layers of security. So, and especially since 9/11, that has taken on. But, you know, the point being is, you know, that the costs of your refueling costs and everything, to my understanding, haven't changed that much. But we're now, in comparison with gas, that is cheap. You know, that is a very cheap fuel source, low overhead costs.
And one of the challenges we're seeing in the Midwest, I mentioned Illinois has legislation. What was really hurting the nuclear plants that Exelon owns in Illinois is subsidized renewables. Nuclear plants don't receive a subsidy. Renewables are. In Ohio, just for instance, what we're asking in Ohio is really not that unique. In Ohio, we have clean energy standards where all the utilities are required to purchase a percentage of their electricity from renewable sources. Wind and solar. Our utilities, Ohio Edison, Toledo Edison, they have to buy, by 2024, they have to buy 20% of their electricity from renewable sources. That's a market. That's a market that's subsidized or a fabricated market that's been created for these renewables. Nuclear is a carbon-free source of energy. Why not lump nuclear into the clean energy standards? You have to buy a certain percentage of wind, a certain percentage of solar, and a certain percentage of nuclear. Like I mentioned, Davis, Bessie, and Perry, they comprise 90% of the clean energy in the state. If they can't continue to sustain their operations and those plants close, how do you replace that? How do you replace 90% of your clean energy? You know what you're going to do? You're going to burn more fossil fuels. You're going to burn more fossil fuels, and that's what Germany has done. They closed their nuclear plants. They're burning coal again. And you can have more renewables.
Yeah, we have a question right here from Ron.
Yes.
The big problem in the United States in the nuclear plant seems to be the nuclear waste, and where do we put it and what do we do with it? France, in the early 2000s, was recycling 90% of their fuel rods and reusing them, and they were taking shipments from Japan and recycling Japan's fuel rods and sending them back. Why has the U.S. not adopted the same kind of nuclear technology as those plants do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know it's beyond First Energy's. I know it's beyond our ability. It's that is something the federal government has been concerned about, enrichment and reuse. I don't work in the nuclear area on a daily basis. I frankly don't know. I am not sure why we don't, why we're not recycling these fuel rods. Because frankly, right now, we're storing spent rods on our property in an on-site disposal facility. There were billions of dollars being put into that permanent repository in Nevada. It was called Yucca Mountain, which looked like a good proposal, but after many years, they scrapped that proposal. So, as far as reuse, I know that France, there's recycling of fuel rods and re-enrichment of uranium. I don't know if it's due to concerns about terrorism, but we're not there.
I have a question.
We have a lot of questions here, so we'll take one on this side.
You've used two words that really have been bothering me for a while. One of them was security and the other was terrorism. I understand that the electric grid in this country is potentially subject to software efforts from people who are not friendly to us. What are you all doing about protecting us?
That is our top priority as a transmission and distribution utility. Our CIO Bennett Gaines is just maniacal about security. He is tremendously focused on this issue, along with our CEO Chuck Jones. We are First Energy is part of a task force with the federal government, the Department of Energy, to look at cybersecurity, to put protocols in place. We recently completed a test with the Department of Energy and a group called EPRI, which is Electric Power Research Institute. We did a 2-year study and test on something that's called electromagnetic pulses, or EMPs, which you've ever heard of, which would be a situation where like a nuclear weapon was detonated at a high altitude, which could potentially affect the electric grid. We recently conducted a test, and it was interesting that the expected results were not nearly as severe as we would expect. In fact, it was somewhat negligible, When you look at the redundancy we have on our systems, the results turned out, what we found out was that largely our older transformers on our system could potentially be affected. There's a lot of redundancy that would override those transformers, and we're actually in the midst of a 5-year investment program where we're replacing a lot of those older transformers as we speak. But that is definitely, it's definitely a big concern for utilities. When you're seeing cyber attacks in various industries, we are working very closely with the federal government on this. There's been a lot of protocols that have been put in place, a lot of surveillance, and in fact, we're looking at, certainly can't talk in detail about them, but we have a lot of new technology that we're putting on our transmission system. The transmission system is essentially like the interstate highway system of the electric grid. The long distance lines that you see out in the countryside or along highways. We're putting a lot of smart technologies out in the system now that would isolate, if we had an outage, that would create redundancies or isolate outages to a very small area where damage was sustained. So it's a big issue. I wouldn't underestimate it. We're looking at it really closely.
Question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
What are you doing with the fly ash from the coal burning plants, and are they being chlorinated, or tell me about it?
We have a process called flue gas desulfurization at our coal-fired plants. It's essentially the emissions that comes through the stack is scrubbed almost with like a limestone slurry. It's almost like a shower, and that basically it scrubs out a lot of the particulates and sulfur out of our coal plant emissions. And what you basically get out of it is this that's called a scrubber, essentially, that technology. That scrubber residue is then either used for a beneficial use, which is basically you could turn it into gypsum and make wallboard out of it. And what we don't send to wallboard plants, we do store in a landfill, basically. We've got only, believe it or not, at this point in Ohio, we only have one coal-fired plant left in Ohio, Samus plant along the Ohio River. They have a disposal site behind the plant called Hollow Rock, which is a large landfill where that scrubber material is transported and disposed of in a permitted landfill. So that's essentially how we do it. We have one plant in western Pennsylvania where we have one of those, you read about it as ash ponds. We had one of those facilities in western Pennsylvania where essentially what was coming out of the plant was almost like, it wasn't a dry powder ash, it was coming out of the plant in kind of like a liquid form and piped to a reservoir. That reservoir was closed this past April as part of a consent decree. That facility has been closed, and we put in a $200 million dewatering facility to essentially dry out that material, turn it into a powder, and it's being disposed of as part of a mine reclamation project in West Virginia. So that's what we're doing right now. Does that make sense?
I asked you a question about transmission.
Yes.
And transmission costs. Let's say that a kilowatt hour charge is about 12 cents. What amount of that 12 cents is transmission cost, and what are you doing to try to bring it down?
Transmission is the smallest portion of the electric bill. You've got generation, which is about 50%, which is actually the energy itself. Distribution's probably 45%. Transmission's probably about 5% of the electric bill. I don't see transmission costs going down because it's an area that frankly needs a lot of investment. It's an area that we're investing in heavily right now to upgrade our system, to upgrade the lines so we can carry electricity more efficiently over our lines. And so that's an area that we are investing in. But again, it's the smallest portion of the electric bill, probably 5 to 6% of the electric bill. I don't think it'll ever go up greater than 10%. I think it'll probably remain somewhere in that area, though I doubt it's going to go down. But, you know, it's interesting you asked that question is because one of the hidden costs of closing plants is transmission. And then it becomes an issue. If we closed 3 major power plants along Lake Erie in 2012, Lakeshore, Bayshore, Lakeshore, Ashtabula, and what was the other plant? Three plants up there. It's been a while. And when we closed those plants, they helped keep the energy electric system stable in the Cleveland area. So what people don't realize is when we closed those 3 plants, we had to build transmission lines to supply more electricity into the Cleveland area. Frankly, we built what was essentially like an extension cord from western Pennsylvania, from a large coal-fired plant. We built a line from western PA up to the Cleveland area, and between that and some other upgrades, it wound up costing $1 billion. So when we closed those plants, due to environmental regulations, we closed that would have cost us maybe $500 million to close those plants. We were kind of forced economically to close those plants. Then when we closed them, the grid operator said, well, you guys need to build transmission to support that area. That wound up costing customers $1 billion. So we would have been, by closing those plants, it would have cost us maybe $400 or $500 million to upgrade those plants. They were old plants. They didn't make economic sense to put new pollution controls on plants from 1925, 1950. But it wound up costing us more in transmission, which is passed along to customers over a very large area, 13-state region transmission. So.
Thank you. You want that? Oh, no, it's good. Thanks, Doug. I just want to remind everybody that next week we have the Ohio Senate President going to be here. That's quite an honor for us, so if you want to bring some guests, and Doug, you mentioned him in your talk, you can come back and talk to him too. Then you can ask him questions. You can kind of grill him like we did you. So, I want to thank everybody today, greeters, Liz Ramsey, Ed Sogan, audio-visual crew, Dan Rich, Tom Page, Tom Tobin, and James Field. You guys do a great job. You put up with us all the time. And also, Doug, if you would pull the Rotobuck for us. The Rotobuck, the daily is $13 and the jackpot is $326.
Sure. Okay. The last 4 numbers are 0183. Do we have a winner? Oh, you're right. No.
See, I just better wait. I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Have a wonderful week. And gratitude is the most important choice in our day, and you can find things to be grateful. We just need to look for them. Have a good week.